Hey everyone, it's patch 3.22 Ancestor, and I wanted to make a final video before the season started on some really important things to talk about for Impending Doom. So, over the past few days, quite a lot of new things have come out, and it's given us some new technology to potentially consider for Impending Doom that I thought I should bring to your attention in a full video right before the league begins. So, one of the first things that people have been telling me about so much to talk about or to give my opinion on are the new gems. Now, some of these gems do affect our build and could potentially interact with them. And some of them are going to be really good and some of them are going to be really bad, unfortunately. So, the ones that we're going to mostly be interested are going to be Sadism, Sacrifice, and Spellblade. These are the only new gems that are going to interact with our build anyway, other than, of course, the new Guardian's Blessing, which we are 100% adding to our build no matter what, in replacement of Divine Blessing with the Holy Relic tech, which I have more information about that in my mid-game setup for Impending Doom if you want to know more about it. But the other three potential damage gems are going to be Sadism, Sacrifice, and Spellblade. So the first one, Sadism, is just not going to be good. The problem with this is it makes your poisons basically last a millisecond, and with that, you're not going to really get any damage. This would be good in other builds, such as potentially low tolerance stackers, but in our case, with this build, no, you would never actually run Sadism, and it's just an absolute waste of space. While this is going to be a great gem for bleeds, for example, unfortunately, it's just not going to really do anything in a poison build. The next one to talk about is Sacrifice. Now, what Sacrifice is going to do is it's going to make you lose 20% of your current life and give you 44% of that as added chaos damage. This effectively works out to 8.8% of your life as added chaos damage. Now, unfortunately, that is kind of weak. The biggest problem here is just the cost on the Sacrifice. 20% of your current life is a lot. The problem with this and the way the numbers work out, if we look at a path of building with about 4.1k life, if we want to look at the mid-game path of building, with this one, it's going to give us slightly more than what an Awakened Void manipulation would give us in terms of DPS. It would slightly beat it. But the problem is, one, our build is currently casting at 5 casts per second almost. And when we're doing 5 casts per second, that means we are losing a hefty chunk of our life per second. This is going to be somewhere around 40-ish, 50-ish% of your life per second, because obviously the drain gets a little bit smaller the less health you have, because it's not of max life, it's current life. But the point is, even after the first cast, if we don't immediately go back up to full life, if we do not give Sacrifice the main benefit that I can have, it's going to immediately be worse than Awakened Void manipulation. And even on lower budgets, sure, this might be a little bit better. But again, the problem is just the sheer amount of life that's going to eat. We have enough regen to basically regen around 30% of our life permanently. So Sacrifice would actually be slowly killing us at a rate about 10% of our life per second. We wouldn't actually be able to sustain it because our cast speed is just way too fast. And then even then, as I mentioned, the damage is barely better. It has such a bad downside to it for any marginal increase that is just unfortunately a garbage gem in this case. It would be good in a lower cast speed build or a build that wasn't centered around applying literally 100 poisons on an enemy. Again, that's not necessarily true because of poison ramp, but you get what I'm trying to say. It'd be better in a lower cast speed build where you could always be at full life and you did like one big ability where it'd really benefit from the added damage. But that's not really the case here. It might be good in like a ignite build of some sort where you're playing Elementalist and you're playing Shaper of Flames. So the added chaos damage just becomes more damage for your ignites. Now, lastly, the one that's going to really matter here is going to be Spellblade. Spellblade is going to be a very, very good early game pick for this build. So what it does is it supports skills and it adds 135% of your main hand melee weapon as added spell damage. Or if you're equipping a two-handed weapon, or if you're equipping a or if you're dual wielding, it's only 60% of each. But the interesting thing about this is it's such a large number that it actually becomes really good. So why don't we look into path of building really quickly and show you what I mean. There's actually one weapon that would massively benefit from this. So the one interesting use case with that early game is going to be a weapon called Breath of the Council. The nice thing about this weapon is it just has so much raw PDPS on it. And because of that, that gets turned into a lot of added physical damage. There's two stats that we care about, added chaos and added physical, because both of them will help our poison. While a weapon that has maybe added fire or added lightning on it wouldn't really be doing anything, as those don't get calculated into poison DPS. So if we look here, if we add the damage that Spellblade would give us to the weapon, it would be 233 to 524 added physical damage with a level 20 Spellblade. As we can see, it is a 75% DPS increase. Now, don't look at this number and be like, wow, that's insane, because you have to account for the fact that you would be losing a gem link. So while this is technically better than everything else, it's slightly worse. So if we compare it to Void Manipulation, which would give us 34% increased damage, that means that using this would be 30% better than an Apex and a Void Manipulation, which means it's a massive DPS increase over Apex. The nice thing about this is Breath of the Council is a one chaos item. Nobody wants this. Nobody uses this for anything. It's literally a completely useless weapon. That is basically a one alchemy staff. That is basically a one alchemy scepter every single season. While Apex, on the other hand, is somewhere around 30, 40, 50 chaos, and it'll most likely be even more this season. So because of that, for day 1 and day 2, what I would recommend is to, instead of rushing an Apex and buying an Apex, is to get yourself a Breath of the Council instead and run yourself a Spellblade. This is going to be substantially more economical and a lot stronger. The nice thing about this is it's actually just overall better. The poison DPS is higher than Apex, which means your pack-to-pack clearing is going to be substantially faster, while your full ramp DPS is going to be really, really good too. The other nice thing about it as well is the 40% chaos skill effect duration, which should apply to your withers, meaning before you get Anomalous Withering Step and Enhance, it should be a lot easier for you to maintain a high wither stack, as with just Nature's Reprisal and the fact that it has a 25% chance to afflict wither for 2 seconds on hit, you can't maintain 15 wither stacks. The 15 wither stacks in the config is a combination of a few of these stacks consistently being up and a combination of us pressing Withering Step on cooldown for an additional 6. But with the 40% increase here, not only will you be able to overlap Withering Stacks buffs, because it would apply to this as well, but it would also increase the ones that you get from your Ascendancy, meaning you should more consistently keep 15 stacks, meaning your total overall medium ramp, not your full ramp, should be a lot faster, as you'll get the 15 stacks a lot faster, and you'll be killing slightly bigger monsters substantially faster. So overall, Breath is going to be a great option. Now, the other thing to talk about is, how does it compare to a later weapon? Well, later on the builds, we would want to drop it. It's not going to be competitive. I made a weapon here in Path of Building, which is basically this weapon, the poison-based dagger that we want to use. And instead, we added flat fizz and flat chaos damage to it. And unfortunately, when we do that, this isn't realistically better. It does say it's 33% better, but that's the total damage for poison. Now, the one thing to mention is the poison DPS itself will be substantially better. 33% increased poison DPS means your pack-to-pack clearing is going to be substantially faster, but overall it's going to be a massive DPS loss. Again, if we look at this 4% increased DPS over the non-flat version of it, that's not accounting for the support. So overall, you'd be losing about 40% of your total damage, which would not make it better. So because of that, later on, we would be replacing it, but this gives us a alternative to using Apex, which is going to be substantially stronger, and I would really recommend to get yourself a Breath. Moving on to the next thing I want to talk about. Now, one thing I failed to mention in the mid-game guide, and honestly, let's go for the early game guide as it's kind of cheap, is ATZIRI'S Reflection. Now, when it comes to PoE, I would say I'm kind of a boomer, where in my head, some items are always valued at some price. And to me, ATZIRI'S Reflection, when I think of it, the initial price that immediately comes to my mind is it's going to be around 15 to 30 div. ATZIRI'S Reflection has always been typically very expensive, but recently, due to it falling out of popularity and due to the card for it being a little bit more common, there are a lot of ATZIRI'S Reflections in the game now, and basically no build wants it. And because of that, it's fallen to anywhere between 2 to 5 divines. And at 2 to 5 divines, it absolutely beats Leaper's Alms. So the thing about Leaper's Alms is the DPS that's actually giving you is kind of a lie. You might look at it and be like, oh, it's giving you 14% every damage. Yes, but that is ramp damage. None of this applies to your poison DPS at all. It only increases your total damage per poison and your total DPS, assuming you actually ramped up to 100 poisons. But for your first 60, 70 poisons, you basically will not know Leaper's Alms is actually active. It's not actually influencing your DPS in the slightest. So while this is a big DPS increase, if you can actually manage to ramp for 11 seconds, unfortunately, you're realistically never going to actually get there. And if we look at Series Reflection, not only is it about a 10% DPS increase in this path of building, but the way that DPS increase is being given to us makes it substantially better and actually substantially more DPS, because most of the damage increase here is through the increased effect of curses. That just straight up makes our poison damage higher. And while yes, this is also making our temp chains better, meaning our ramp is also going to be a little bit longer, the fact that this is also applying to despair and to punishment, which are giving us immediate raw damage, means we'll be killing mobs a lot faster. So its Series Reflection for 2 to 3 div is a great swap over from a Leaper's Alms. The nice thing about this is you become immune to curses, which is a really nice defensive layer to have in some maps, as well as giving you quite a few resistances, making getting resistances a lot easier, and some movement speed. The one downside is you would have to make up the 5% spell suppression on Leaper's Alms. And the problem is some of our gear is already being pretty strained. For example, the 2 spell suppression rolls that we actually want to get on our helmet and our boots are already near max. Now, we could make up the spell suppression that we're missing because we only need to get 2% spell suppression to actually beat this. We don't need the full 5. We could get that by getting perfectly max rolled, but those are going to be very expensive, especially if you want to try and go for fracture. Fracture spell suppression becomes wildly expensive, especially if you're going for max rolls. So instead, what we would do is we would just drop a passive point and pick up this small spell suppression node here. And this will completely fix any problems we have. And then we'd be able to immediately run a Series Reflection and just have an overall better build. So I'd recommend to potentially look for a Series Reflection moving on into next season if it's cheap. Now, there's one final thing I want to talk about, which might potentially become super fucking broken. Now, at first, I wasn't really a big fan of tattoos. In my opinion, I thought there was only going to be around maybe 15, 20 total tattoos. And while some of them might have been slightly useful, I didn't really expect much. Well, I was wrong. There are going to be 87 different tattoos. And with 87 different tattoos, we are basically guaranteed that some of these are going to be very impactful for our build. While we were streaming yesterday, someone actually ended up mentioning this while we were talking about tattoos, that there's a possibility for a curse effect tattoo to exist. And if a curse effect tattoo exists, it would most likely be replacing the intelligence nodes, which we have quite a lot of up here. Now, if you don't know, curse effect is a massive DPS multiplier for a build. This node right here for a curse effect gives us 20% total curse effect, and it's worth 20% of our damage. So curse effect is very strong. What we can expect if there is a curse effect tattoo, that'd either be 2% or 3% curse effect. And if we were to replace every single one of these intelligence nodes with either 2% or 3%, well, it would actually be stronger than picking up this wheel. Now, why does that matter? Well, if we were to replace all this, we wouldn't have any intelligence, but there is a way to very easily fix that. What we would do is we would drop these 3 points, pick up this jewel socket, and we would put a elegant hubris in this node. Now, with an elegant hubris that is commemorating Casprio, it would be swapping the low life node over to Supreme Ostentation. And what this does is it makes us ignore attribute requirements, but the attributes don't actually do anything for us, which is completely fine. With this, what this means is that we can now get rid of every single bit of attribute in our gear, get rid of every single bit of attribute in our talent points, get rid of every single bit of attribute in our passive tree, and that means we don't need any of these end nodes, so we can replace all of them with curse effect. And if we do that, we suddenly don't need any of these dexterity nodes either. Now, one important tattoo that would be nice to put in here, but the opportunity cost might be a little bit too high, is the new flask effect duration one. Because our silver flask does not have 100% uptime. It's only an 80% uptime. It's a little bit too hard to get it. In my opinion, I don't feel like it's worth going down here, so we can't get natural remedies. So unfortunately, because of that, we can't have 100% uptime on it. And if we were to go get ourselves a 28% quality flask, that only puts us at 86% uptime. So we would still need a little bit of extra duration. And if we were able to fit in maybe 3, 4 of those flask effect nodes, which we most likely will be able to fit in here even with no Supreme Ostentation. But Supreme Ostentation, we'd be able to fit 4 of those in here. get to flask effect duration, we need to have permanent onslaught. And then suddenly we could also get rid of all these other dexterity nodes and put something else on it, as we won't need any dexterity. So if that's true, and if there's any sort of powerful dexterity tattoos that we can fit in here, then this is absolutely amazing for our build. The other thing as well to mention is currently the one dexterity tattoo that we know of that's good is the movement speed one. So even if none of the other dexterity tattoos end up being decent, we could fill in every single one of these dex nodes with movement speed, giving us something like 60% extra movement speed, which alone is very much worth it. Our build doesn't have the most movement speed because we don't have a Quicksilver flask. We only have an Onslaught flask. So getting another 60% in here would be great. It'd basically be having a permanent silver. It'd basically be the same thing as having a permanent Quicksilver flask on at all times. So it'd effectively be a 5th flask slot. So it'd effectively be a 6th flask slot. It's going to be really, really good. So Supreme Ostentation might be a power play in this build before Transcendence. Obviously, late game, you're going to want to swap this out for a Transcendence instead and stack some armor with 100% physical converted to elemental to abuse that defensive layer. But until we get there, which will be a little bit hard to do, this is going to be amazing. And this potentially might straight up just be better than going Transcendence for a lot of cases. We'll have to see how this plays out in the end. But you definitely should keep this in the back of your head as a possibility for what we could do with tattoos. That's all I really have to say for this video. I hope I taught you guys about Spellblade. I think Spellblade is going to be a great swap for this build. Hopefully, Breath of the Council is not going to be too expensive. I don't think it's going to be APEP. So I think it overall will be the better option. I really like adding in the ATZIRI'S Reflection Tech instead, as it's just, in my opinion, so much better of a shield compared to Leapers. And I am now very excited about tattoos. I've gone from being kind of skeptical about them to expecting them to be very good. I already knew about the whole Supreme Ostentation tech that you could do with them, but I just didn't really see a reason why, because I didn't think any of the tattoos are going to be good. But again, as I said, with 87 tattoos, it's guaranteed to be good. At least guaranteed to have some good tattoos in here. So overall, this season is going to look very good for Pathfinder, and I'm actually very excited about some of the new technology that we're going to be able to add onto this build, especially since there really wasn't looking to be much changes for this build going into 322. But now I'm very excited that we have quite a lot of few changes to look forward to. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll be more than happy to answer any of them. Otherwise, I stream every day on Twitch, so you can feel free to come by there and ask me your questions there. And with that said, I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. I hope to see cuties in the next video.